Welcome everyone to the next session. My name is Martin Roll. I'm very happy to host after the opening with Kevin Sneeder, the next fireside chat, which we're going to have with a very honored guest today. I hope you're well. I hope you enjoyed the opening. So now we're going to change the track slightly into a new topic here, because the conversation topic is going to be business as a force for good, and the flow will be the following. With our guest today, I would spend probably the first 30 minutes discussing on a few very strategic issues. And while we do that, keep your questions flowing, because in the latter part of the fire chat, this is your chance to get involved. So make sure that you fire the questions away, and we will attend to you a bit later here. I'm actually very excited because our special guest today, you see him here on camera, that's André Hoffmann. André Hoffmann is a Swiss businessman. He's an environmentalist. He's a philanthropist, and actually wears a lot of other hats. He's the vice chairman of Roche Holding, which is a huge pharmaceutical, one of the big global pharmaceutical companies. He's member of the governing board of the World Economic Forum. He holds a lot of board memberships. He's an advocate of sustainability and environmental protection. So that meant he was actually serving as the international vice president of the Worldwide Fund from 2007 to 2017. He's also the founder and chairman of the advisory board of the Hoffmann Global Institute for Business and Society at INSEAD Business School, and he holds, like myself, an MBA from INSEAD. André, welcome to HPAIR. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm very grateful that you are inviting me, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. How was your start on 2021? I mean, we came out of COVID, and we'll go back to that. So have you had a good start on 2021?
Well, there was a cartoon circulating on the internet which sort of summed up what I wanted. Somebody said, I've tried the 7-day free period and I'm not interested in buying the rest of the year. It's been a succession of incredible events. This entire COVID situation was science fiction until a year ago. And the succession of events we've seen as a consequence of this, the geopolitical events, the technical events, the emergence of new technologies at the same time, and I'm sure we will talk about this again. It's just been absolutely non-stop.
Absolutely agree. And that actually turns it into the first weekend. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's it, really.
Yeah, very good. I'm going to turn into COVID-19, which, as you said, rightly so, has affected all of us. So when you look at kind of COVID-19 as I hope, a turning point for society, how has COVID fundamentally changed the way business operate and think of their own rights in their own roles in society?
Well, there are many effects that we can look at together. Let's start by talking about the most obvious one, the fact that we are now, you and I, talking together in a remote situation. As you will hear during this next half an hour, my internet connection is not particularly good, but the rapidity at which we have got used to teleworking, to work remote, is quite extraordinary. In the pharmaceutical industry, we've moved to a lot of remote practices, and not only in pharmaceutical, but also in healthcare. Telemedicine is a reality now. It was a concept a year ago. I'm thinking of the Apollo chain of hospitals in India, who have launched an application for healthcare over the internet about I think it was in February of this year. There are now up to 200 million people who have subscribed to this application. Okay, this is India, and the numbers are big, of course, but it shows to which extent people are very willing to get this prime layer of advice from a remote location, and that is going to change the way we work for a long time. The most obvious one, the second most obvious one, is the travel. We're just not traveling anymore, and yet most businesses are still coping. So I imagine that once travel will be possible again, we will not come back to the same level of traveling that we had before, and the sort of meetings we're having now will become a little bit more usual. And I suppose that's an important consideration.
Yeah. Very good one. We also think about, I think that it was a turning point last year. We think about a company's success in terms of financial profits, but maybe there's also a human side, a cultural side, a natural capital side to consider. So can companies today, especially in the healthcare industry, which I know you know very well, balance the need to make money and also the need to create value in society? How do you see that?
Well, a very important point. And I think to start with, I would like to say that the crisis we're facing now was already in existence before the pandemic. You know, a lot of the pressure points that we are now seeing in complete daylight were already in the shadows and were already shaping up in many ways. I'm thinking about the crisis of the planet, the loss of biodiversity, but also social discrepancies, lack of inclusive growth, an imbalance of values, which was already not helping very much the world to the world governance. You know, the emergence of the Sustainability Development Goals of the United Nations did not come out of a hat. They came out because there was a build-up demand for finding new ways of measuring success in the future. How do we construct a world where we can indeed continue to create the wealth we need to lift more people out of poverty and to develop the less developed nation in a harmonious manner, but also an environment where we could sort of do this without damaging the system further. When I say damaging the system, I'm thinking not only of pollution, climate, overfishing, and all the elements of the natural world, but I'm also thinking of our social system. The fact that there are minorities which are being exploited by other minorities, in this dialogue between public good and private good, which was never really resolved. So, what does COVID do in a situation like this? It acts like an accelerator. It acts like a sort of magnifying glass, which actually shows the weaknesses of the system. And, you know, in a nutshell, the fact that we believe that we had a stable system a year ago and that a virus, which is the most primitive form of existence on Earth, it's not even alive. You know, it only alive if it has a host. If only it's reproduced, if it can sort of parasite somebody else. And so that's something as simple and has thrown our system out of balance and has sort of brought us to our knees. I find that a very strong signal that our system is not fit for purpose anymore. And this is something which we should really address.
Yeah. Are you confident that it will get better? That it was actually a turning point, and there was a lot of negative sides and lethal sides, and we have to deal with that. But are you confident that we'll also learn from 2020 and onwards, and some of those challenges you described will get to a better place?
Yes, no. I think that we tend, as a system, we tend to deal with emergencies. We tend to deal with acute situations better than we do with long-term thinking. We can come back to this balance between short-term and long-term perhaps a bit later. But immediately we've been confronted with an array of quite complex things. I mean, white supremacists walking on the Capitol is not something surprising in the current environment. We know what the solutions are. We know that we need to be more transparent. We know that we need to rebuild the trust. I don't know if you saw that, Martin, but the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2021 was published a couple of days ago, and it shows that the bubble of trust that the majority of the people were willing to give government 6 months ago when it started dealing with the pandemic has completely burst. In the US in particular, there's a loss of 22 percentage point of trust into the government. I mean, these are tectonic shifts, and I imagine that only a concerted action will get us out of that. And I think that's why I am quite optimistic. I mean, I don't really participate into this thinking of the roaring 20s is going to be the future, but I do believe that we are going to have to address certain issues quite simply because they've just grown out of all proportions, and they are blocking the way to the reset that we should be striving for.
I know, André, that you are a big proponent for business as a force for good. You have been speaking at it at the World Economic Forum and in many other places, and you are a very vocal voice on on business as a force for good, and it's a very evolving theme. What role do you think in this notion that business should play? How should they act, and what needs to change, really?
Well, Martin, you and I went to INSEAD. We took an MBA, and when we did our MBA, we were taught the traditional way of managing businesses, which is very much predicated on the Milton Friedman doctrine. Milton Friedman, an economist who published 50 years ago, 2 months ago, I mean, really 50 years ago, a famous essay which can be summarized by the business of business is business. So business exists in order to create value, in order to create money, create income, and that income get then redistributed to society through taxes, through dividends, through share prices, through salaries, through livelihoods, and all this money transferred from the private sector to the public sector would allow the public sector to repair the damages done with the original production of that value. So the example that comes to mind is, for instance, a forest. You cut it down, you make 100, you pay 50 to the state, and the state, with the help of NGO, very often tries to replant the forest. I would suggest this is absurd. What you really want is to make sure that you take 10 every year for the foreseeable future, so that you have enough to go forward. But to come back to business, the short-term profit maximization mantra, which this Milton Friedman doctrine really underlines, has led to some collateral damages. In fact, we could go as far as saying that it has destroyed part of the world. The previous United Nations goals of the Millennium Goals have allowed to create quite a lot of wealth, and they've been a success in that respect. A lot of people were lifted out of poverty. I'm thinking about the 800 million Chinese who were suddenly brought into a state where they could afford consumption and all the things we expect from a decent life. But the cost to the system was huge. The cost to the social system, to the human system, and to the natural system was very big. So we need from now on to find a way of continuing to create the value we need, but at a lower cost to our different sources of capital. So I think it's important to understand that this is in effect just an accounting problem. At the moment, we're measuring the wrong dimension. We just think, sorry.
So do you see the public sector taking a larger role? Is it a public-private partnership? Do you see a larger role for NGOs? You said there's a certain disbalance with short, long-term profits here. So is it the public sector, or what kind of partnerships will emerge for that? How do you see some of the solutions coming up in this aspect?
So for me, the key issue is that the regulators have to, not only regulators, society at large, we don't have to really sort of point fingers at certain, but society, we have to find a way of recompensing business for the value it creates, not only for its own shareholders, but it creates for society. So how do we do that? We do not only measure finance. We do not only look at financial flows. We concentrate as well to the impact these corporations are having. And when I say corporation, it's not only a corporation. It's any effort of investment, any asset allocation model should have that into account. When you are taking an investment decision, you are not just looking at the financial return, you're also looking at the impact that you're having on social systems, on human systems, and on natural systems. And this capitals approach, because we talk about measuring capitals use, is I think the best way to have a holistic approach to what we are doing in terms of impact as much as in terms of finance. Of course, I'm not suggesting for a second that companies should not be profitable, but profitability alone is not enough.
Fantastic. I also know that we have potentially a lot of startup founders and future entrepreneurs in the audience here. What would be your advice to them? Because how and should they kind of build their future startups, and what should these young founders do when it comes to some of those sustainability challenges that we are discussing today? Do you see like fundamentally different business models, or if I or someone were to set up a startup today, what is needed to tackle some of those issues?
Well, my initial reaction would be to say that the current way of doing things has brought us into the situation where we are now. So why do we like startups? Why do we like, and I can make a little example in the pharmaceutical industry later. Why do we like startups? Because startups come up with new ideas which are disrupting the existing normal and allowing us to sort of change several things. Nothing is more difficult than innovation in a big corporation, because big corporations are in many ways layered and structured in such a way that will allow you to avoid risk and avoid new ideas and avoid new thinking. So startups are a way of dealing with that issue. In the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, since we have a limited patent life for most of our discoveries, we want to make sure that we can be global quickly. So we have also developed big sales organizations which go all over the planet. And that means that our systems are very hierarchical, very structured, very organized. This is not the most propitious way of discovering of bringing innovation to healthcare. And so the companies which have done well, and I'm glad to say that our company is one of them, are those who have been able to recognize that danger and to do something about it. So our research institutions are divided in three. We have one based in Japan, one based in California, one based in Europe, and we work with these three organizations, not in competition, but in parallel ways. And we've also allocated a huge part of our budget to what we call partnering. And partnering is identifying startups, is identifying universities, is identifying competitors where something happens that we can help to facilitate, all in order to bring the innovation to the patient as quickly as possible. Our business model is not based on just producing medicine. We are defining ourselves as doing today what the patient needs tomorrow. So we spend a lot of time on creating new opportunities, and that's innovation in the broader sense.
Yeah. When it comes to international collaboration, and this also involves some of the industries you're definitely involved in. I mean, maybe where governments fail, or how should people and private companies here to step up to solve that? And how have you seen like scientific innovation, particularly during COVID? I mean, we got a vaccine out in less than a year, and more to come here. So how did you see international collaboration around some of those very important issues here? What came out of it, and can it improve somehow?
So that comes to our conversation of the world architecture as we were describing it before. Businesses trying to make money, governments trying to take the money and to redistribute it. Suddenly, we have one factor which changes, and that factor is health. Suddenly, there is a challenge on world health. Now, that introduces a new element, which I would call fear. Fear is a negative thing, but worry. It's something that suddenly spurns collective action, and that collective action has, because it is in the benefit of all of us, has yielded some amazing results. I mean, since the beginning of the years, we have startups working with big corporation working together. So we have regulators helping bigger corporation to accelerate. We have states, healthcare systems buying ahead some of the vaccine in order to facilitate the cash flow and de-risking the research. We really have a myriad of industry relationship with regulators as well, so public-private partnerships in the broader sense, which have helped us to go much quicker into where we wanted to go. So yes, that particular vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, which is a complete new mode of action, it's never been used before for prophylactic vaccine, is suddenly working in 8 months. Nobody did it quicker than 8 years before. That's amazing.
And how could that happen? Because I mean, I'm not in healthcare and biotech. You know much more than I do about it. This is really complex, and we are working across borders and time zones and big and small companies. You see some of these collaborations, including what you're involved in as well. What broke down that complexity? How did that fast track? What did we learn? Why did business get so disrupted, and now we're getting here? So what did we learn from that? What happened?
Well, that's one of the reply I should have made before to the advice to startups. You have to go at it with a certain amount of humility. Mm-hmm. In a competitive environment, you want to keep what the result is of your research because you want to make sure that you have a competitive advantage when the product comes out. You do that through patenting as much technology as possible. Here, we're not dealing with a potential market. We're dealing with a health emergency. And so suddenly, some of the traditional way of doing business are no longer appropriate. And if you believe that the benefit of the work you're doing is for the patient, then there becomes an absolute necessity to be able to open up to a number of different collaborations. And that's what we've seen happening. I mean, in all honesty, I didn't think it was going to happen so quickly and so efficiently as it has, but it has, and that's great news.
Yeah. Do you see, I mean, it's probably fair to say that the relation between Asia and the Western countries can be a little embattled at times here. Do you see this kind of the urge for scientific innovation that the better collaboration could actually be established between the West and Asia?
Well, I can tell you that this is a very important subject. I see there are 4 different situations that are developing in this pandemic. There is the health issue, and I think we've discussed that. There is the social issue. People are suffering. They need to be funded. They need to be looked after. There is the psychological issue, and then there is the political issue. And the idea of saying since the beginning of the crisis, let's shut the borders, it will stop the virus to come. The idea of saying, like the previous US administration kept on saying, it's a Chinese virus, has really not helped much. I mean, the Chinese have put online immediately, as soon as they had it, the genetical type of the virus, which has allowed vaccine manufacturers to work in it already last year. This is something that happened a long time ago. And this communication and the wonderful help of new technologies, as we said earlier on, has helped to shape things that we would not have seen otherwise. The data flow between countries at scientific level, at university level, at company level has continued. Governments have a tendency of making hay, where the sun is lasting. Now they have a good international relationship issue, and they're using it a lot to sort of complexify the issue. But it's still happening among people of at a technical level.
So do you think business here, I mean, back to this kind of as a force for good for kind of a broader context, can business act as a unifying force, and how can it be achieved, and what should they do?
So the only way to them that is if you have a common purpose. I mean, we were talking about business as a force for good. The purpose of a company is not to make money only. The purpose of a company is to serve the community in which it is active in a way that eventually will be profitable. Profitability is not the prime aim. The prime aim is to deliver the service that you have been created for. So for the health industry, we should regroup around the patient. For the world governance system, we have to regroup around the citizen. Citizens are under threat. I remind you, there are nearly 2 million people killed by this virus. We need to make sure that in front of so much tragedy and so much sadness, we are able to have a united front. So to come back to this notion of fear we had before, this emotion, this one willingness to carry together the burden of the disease is something that can, yes, unite us much better than political speech can. Sadly, certain governments have decided that they want to play in a more personal manner rather than in a global manner. But I'm sure these are things that are going to disappear over the next couple of years. I mean, the notion that the vaccine is available. The vaccine is available. Governments have placed orders with the manufacturers outside of the WHO system because they want to protect their own citizens. I think that's sort of sadly understandable because that's why they're elected. But we now need quickly, and I insist on the word quickly, to make this vaccine available to as many people as possible on the planet, because if we only do partial vaccination, this virus is going to mutate. And if it mutates, we're going to have much more trouble to do something about it.
Fantastic. I can see we have a lot of questions coming in. Keep it up, and I'm actually going to address some of the. So, André, we'll take some of the questions here, and then we'll wrap up on some leadership topics before we end the session here. First question here from Nimisha. How do you think that our environment was impacted by COVID-19?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Yeah. How do you think that our environment was impacted by COVID-19?
So that's a very interesting question. The CO2 emission, for instance, went down something like 17%, if I remember well. A lot of the things that we thought were incompressible are suddenly looking very different. The air quality has increased in the big conurbations. The amount in Venice, you can see the bottom of the lagoon again when you stand on the gondola, which is something that hasn't happened for years, etc., etc. So there are a number of anecdotal evidences about how nature has been supported. So when we say environment, I'm thinking of nature here to start with, has benefited from that. But of course, that's not the solution, because if you look at a big climate change event, for instance, the fire in Australia, the fire in California on the West Coast, all the way to Canada, the floods, the hurricane season stuff. I mean, 1 year is not going to make a difference. What's important is to recognize that we now have a demonstration that it is possible to do something, and we need to make sure that we now gradually do something about the climate change threat, which we hope to address on the COP26 in Glasgow in November this year, a year later, but which is the continuation of the Paris Accord, and where there's going to be a lot of concentration onto climate. Onto the climate commitment of CO2 reductions. At the same time, we should not forget the loss of nature, which is, in my view, at least as important, if not more important. And there as well, we have an international conference taking place in China, probably in September this year, where we're going to fix the targets for species survival rates. And these are targets which are very important, because I see nature as a life supporting system on Earth. And if we don't have nature to function anymore, we as a race will not survive for very much longer. I mean, we can continue to play around for a couple of generations, but that is the end of the system as we know.
And I know that, as we heard in the beginning, that you served, I think, more than 10 years, right, on the board of the WWF. So absolutely, nature and animals very important here.
If you talk about nature, the WWF as a Living Planet report. The Living Planet report came out 2.5 months ago. 68% of vertebrate species have been lost in the last 40 years. Now, this is not something you can change by emitting less CO2 or something like this. This is gone forever. Extinction is forever. So we need to do something. We also need to do something about the social system as well, but that's perhaps another.
Yeah, exactly. Another question here from Aditi. Could you please elaborate what you meant by never waste a good crisis?
Well, I didn't say that today, so I'm very grateful that she read something else that I wrote.
Okay.
What I mean is that, as I was trying to say earlier on, we're in a situation where things are moving very quickly. We can now point with our fingers onto what is wrong in our existing system. And in particular, for me, this relentless concentration onto the short term. The fact that we have been taught that we need to specialize, we need to pick the low-hanging fruits, we need to constantly go to where we get the maximum benefit for our move. The result is that we've narrowed the platform on which we are standing, and that some exogenous shock like the virus can push us down and make us fall from that platform. So in the future, we need to have more complex systems. We need to create a collaboration with all the factors around us and not domination. The idea of saying we humans, the Anthropocene, we are going to make sure that nature obeys only to us. I mean, it's a joke. It just doesn't happen. So we need to learn to live with it. And the virus is a typical example. It's going to mutate. It's going to become different. We're going to have to learn to live with that virus. So when I say never waste a good crisis, I mean it's at times of major crisis that you can put in place the solutions that are going to deal with the long term, the root causes of why we have these weaknesses and why this pandemic is hurting us so badly. By the way, I don't claim any ownership of this. I think it was Winston Churchill who said that during the Second World War.
Yeah, good one. That's another question here from Raya. As the vice chairman of Roche, how can the pharma market inequality between developing and developed nations be addressed?
Well, I mean, our ultimate aim for all of us is the universal health coverage. We want to make sure that health is guaranteed to everybody, everywhere on the planet, as quickly as possible. The issue of drugs in the developing country is not a question of price only. It's also a question of health system and how they are governed and how they are constructed. What developing countries need first and foremost is structure. Building up of structure, building up health systems. I give you the example of China, which has started building a system of health coverage for its citizens only about 20 years ago. And, you know, we're talking about 1.2 billion people who are now all have access to some doctor at some level. We're not at the same level as we are in our part of the world, but that example over a period of 20 years shows to me that it can happen somewhere else. Look at India. In India, very much the same situation. Africa should be the next example. We need to collectively help healthcare systems to develop the universal health coverage that we're all driving for. I think that in the future, we should not look at pharma industry just as manufacturers of drugs, but we should look at pharma industry as a partner of healthcare system. How can we use our expertise in certain disease areas to make the healthcare more appropriate in the geography in which we are?
There's a question here from Rakshit. What's your take on the healthcare industry in the Asian countries, and what type of technologies do you think would disrupt this industry?
Well, we've opened up a research center in China where we already have in excess of 600 people working. There is an enormous amount of innovation coming from these markets, in particular by the use of new technology and what we call in our jargon the real-world data. You know, the fact that we have access to vast pools of information in China in a standardized manner, so very similar from one region to the other, is helping us to sort of develop insights which will, I suppose, help us to do three things: give better outcome, so patients will be better treated; lower the cost of healthcare, because I hope that this information will allow us to intervene earlier in the process, thereby cutting some costs; and thirdly, a better allocation of resources and then they deserve to be served better. And if we can identify what the big drivers are through artificial intelligence analysis of the big pools of data, we could make a significant difference there.
Yeah. There's a question here, and you mentioned China and things you do there. There's a question here from Cornelius. The pharma industry seems to be a kind of a conservative industry at large. How does Roche actively go to the edges of innovation like a startup, and how do you do that? How do you renew yourself?
Well, we have defined ourselves as an innovation company, so we do no Me Too product. We are first in class or best in class. That's our aspiration. We don't do generica. When our products get at the end of the patent life, we don't promote them anymore. Other people can pick that up, and they do that much better than we can. So that implies that we are constantly investing in R&D and trying to develop more new approaches to medicine. As I said before, we have split up our research groups and we have developed partnering. But what it really means is that we must have in-house sufficient knowledge to understand what's happening in the field, to be always able to pick up the beautiful flowers that are growing in the meadows. And when I say pick up, I don't mean harvest, I mean nurture, I mean working together. We define ourselves as the partner of choice for development. We've done a couple of transactions over the years where we have acquired companies but not taken control. We've done that with Genentech, our Californian subsidiary, which for years was managed at arm's length. We've recently done the same approach with two companies involved in data management, so that we can really develop an activity based on real-world data in the US. So we have a certain amount of experience in helping young entrepreneurs. When I say young entrepreneurs, it's not a question of age; it's a question of young in the process entrepreneurs who to come up with new ideas. And frankly, for us, it's a question. Our R&D budget is the biggest in the industry. It's, I think, number 3 in the world of all industry put together. This is our life and blood. That's what we do. Doing today what the patient needs tomorrow. If you have any alternative solution how to foster innovation, I'd be very grateful to receive the recipe. I think one of the important things, coming back to what I said before, is this humility and also this possibility of allowing people to fail. You don't want to be the one who knows everything. You want to give other people the opportunity to develop and grow. And if you do that, you must accept that sometimes it doesn't work.
Very good. And here's a question from Riti and actually many others in our chat today here. What are your thoughts on the public skepticism towards the COVID vaccine? Do you believe that it is justified or unnecessary politification of the virus?
Well, again, today I heard an interesting story, which I'm going to quote. A reporter in Germany has been conducting studies about what happened when the first polio vaccine was introduced. It was in 1874, and at the time, Imperial Germany made the vaccination compulsory. So everybody had to be vaccinated in order to eradicate polio. And he's discovered that all the people who were inoculated in 1874 are dead today. So that must be telling us something, no?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a bit of a joke. But anyway, of course we need to get vaccinated. This vaccination will only work if we are, in the long run, doing something collectively. Because vaccination is a tool among other tools that you can use to manage an epidemic or a pandemic in that case. But it will only work if everybody gets vaccinated quickly. Every single time we inoculate somebody, we give the virus an opportunity to mutate around the vaccine. So when we do a preventative vaccination, it's fine because there's no acute phase. Now here we have an acute phase. So every single time somebody develops immunity, the vaccine, I don't like saying that, but it's a bit learns about it and can mutate, and that will make the fact more complicated. So there is. In my reasonable approach, there is absolutely no reason for not getting vaccinated. Now, why do people get scared of it? Because it was developed quickly and because they don't trust governments anymore. So if you want to create a real trust, introduce the notion of transparency, and we need to reintroduce this predictability idea. So we need to publish all these results. We need to demonstrate that it is safe, and we need to demonstrate that it is important. I cannot think of any other way of doing it.
Fantastic. Here's a question from Rishi. Because of climate change across the world, how are the world's leading companies changing their policies towards environment sustainability? Yeah,
so I'd like to say two things. I would take environmental out of it. Sustainability has to be environmental, otherwise there is no future. But sustainability also has to do with creating positive cash flows, otherwise there's no future either. Sustainability also has to do into treating people in the social and human system as well as possible. You cannot build a stable society on a system where one part of the population dominates the other part or abuses the other parts. I mean, the Black Lives Matter situation in the US, it's quite clear. If you are part of a particular community in the US today, you do not have the same chance of success that if you're part of another one. And you can see the sort of imbalance and even crisis this has created. So sustainability is something that is across the board. You need to think long term and to ensure that every decision you take takes into account the social, the human, and the environmental capital before you take that decision. And for that, we need to measure impact. And as I said before, this is an accounting issue. We need to find a way of making sure that we can put a number to the consequence of our dealing with of our dealings. Quite simply, if I build a new factory at the moment, the only thing I have in front of me is discounted cash flows or residual values or calculation of that sort. I internally have a matrix where I decide what the impact of that factory is going to be locally, but I don't have any universal language for that. So we need to have this measure. We need to make sure that there is a measure which will allow us to deal with that. And I think sustainable environment and sustainable social system are to be addressed in the same way.
Question here from Yang Nicholas. What implication does the US-China trade war have for a European company?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, sorry.
What implication does the US and China trade war have for a European company?
Yeah, I mean, if we come back to this notion we had before of data being an important component of the future, data being the new oil, data being the place where we can actually add value, where we can create business models which are going to be sustainable in better understanding of our environment. If we look at that particular issue, then we have two immediate consequences. One is that in China, privacy laws do not apply the same as they do in the US or in other parts of the world. So they have more access to more data and they can treat them more actively. But it also puts into evidence quite clearly that in the battle for data, we Europeans are not particularly well equipped. We don't have one of these big industrial champions dealing with data. All of this is either in China or in the US. And that's worrying. If we look at Africa has very little thing anyway. So the new infrastructure that is being built at the moment, and by the way, it's where the future of humanity is going to be decided, has to be leapfrogging all the existing technologies to be able to create that. And if I look at the effort, for instance, of Rwanda and President Kagame, there are some very interesting works being done on the new technologies, in particular the use of drones. They were the first one to have a drone code, how to fly with drone. The use of data, there's a very active ministry for promotion of data. I mean, all these ideas can gather speed, and I think that's very important. Now, where we have a competitive advantage, turning your question around, is all that has to do with the restoration of natural capital. The Green New Deal that the European Union is proposing at the moment, which is currently being debated by the European Parliament, would allow a lot of money following the crisis to be invested into green infrastructure, which will bring back nature-based solution into the way we construct our I think that has a lot to do with this complexity we were talking about before, and should allow us to create more resilient systems. Now, America and China are not as progressed in that thinking, and there might be there an opportunity for us to find some sort of lead into one of the world's problems.
And that follows up with a question here from Muskan. What are your views on the carbon credit system?
So if we really want to come back to this accounting problem we've been touching on a number of times over the last questions, the cost of doing business is not accounted properly because we take certain things for granted. Yeah. So we take fresh air or clean water for as a natural thing. We use nature because nature is for free, but we also know it's priceless. And at the same time, there's this sort of contradiction that we have to deal with. So the idea that there is going to be a carbon price at some stage, the idea that there is going to be a carbon tax at some stage, is, I think, inescapable. When we deal our investments on the purely financial systems in Roche, we do account for a certain internal price of carbon, which is something we've defined ourselves, just in order to add an extra hurdle. If you are now investing into new assets which are going to last for at least 50, probably 100 years, you cannot neglect the price of carbon because that's going to come. It's already on the drawing board into a number of different political agendas. Now, the idea of having a market system which will regulate the price of carbon can only be good as long as it is a genuinely common effort. 2 years ago, I would have said we're nearly there. Now, with the international governance being split up more than ever before, it's going to be more difficult to put in place. But I mean, I have high hopes for the new US administration. If there is a conversation at UNEP level on this, we might well be able to find a system that would work. So the answer to your question is, I think it's a good idea as long as it's properly regulated and that everybody plays with the same rules.
So a question here from Aurélie from Sciences Po. What would be the impact of the current pandemic on people's behavior? Do you think that increased awareness on the importance to protect the environment will impact the way people think and behave? Or do you think the impact will actually be limited?
So there are two answers here. One answer is yes, absolutely. People have realized how difficult it is to maintain the current order and how that particular system is unfit for purpose. It is not resilient. It's been destroyed by a virus. Obviously, we need to rebuild something more complex, more resistant, more respectuous of people, more humble, just as a passenger of the planet rather than as a dominator of the planet. Mm-hmm. The other side is, oh my God, we're running out of money. It's all going wrong. We need jobs. We need output. We need quickly. We will deal with nature later. Who cares about nature? Let's quickly go and use it and do something. And this contradiction, that particular debate is where the crux lies for 2021. If at the end of this year we have gone on to acceleration of system as usual, we are doomed. There is no future possible if we do not take into account the human, the social, and the natural capital. And we need to measure this. So I hope that the answer to the question is a simple one. We will go for rebuilding with a nature-based solution agenda and in stability among different social groups. But, can we trust humanity to do that? These new technologies, which would allow us to do that, can be used both ways. They can accelerate the existing system, or they can reform it.
Very good. Question here from Annika. How did Ross quickly pivot and adapt in response to the health crisis caused by the pandemic? And what was the most important leadership quality you noticed that helped the organization to do so?
We do not do vaccines. It's something we have no competence in. The know-how is just missing. So we thought we could identify somebody who we could help, and we could go in that direction and help them. But then you have all this idea of leveraging the discovery and distributing it. And frankly, this is not something we do better. So we decided that we would focus on two things. We would focus on testing. We were the first one to introduce a PCR test, and PCR is a Roche technology anyway. We discovered. We now have a portfolio of 14 different COVID-19 tests. The tests which are based on blood, tests were based on nose, tests were based on throats. We're trying to do as much as possible. Rapid tests, short tests, antigen tests, antibody tests, etc., etc. What we also have tried to do is having a look at our portfolio and repurpose some of the drugs we are using to see if they can be useful for the treatment of the disease. Because vaccine is prevention, we also need to have treatment. And one of the products we have signed a collaboration with an American company where we are now producing in large quantities a monoclonal antibody cocktails. Monoclonal antibodies is something we understand well. We've been dealing with them in oncology for quite a long time. And so we have some capacity which we can put to the disposal of our partner, Regeneron. And with Regeneron, we've manufactured a cocktail of two different antibodies which has shown efficacy if it's given early enough in the development of the disease. We have also repurposed one of our interleukin-6 intimidator. This is a product that's used for autoimmune disease when we want to regulate the immune system in order to cure patients which have, in particular, rheumatoid arthritis. That drug can be repurposed for dealing with what is known as the cytokine storm, which is the overreaction of the immune system when you get to the acute phase of COVID-19. And that has been proven to be particularly efficient, and in particular, the number that sticks in my mind is 20% of reduction in death of people who take this drug. So we're trying to help piecemeal. Now, to the question leadership, what was needed? Again, and that's, I think, the lesson I would like you to remember at the end of this conversation. You need to be humble towards this. You need to go there with your eyes wide open and to not pretend that you understand the disease better than you do. We know very little about that disease. So, we need to make sure that we listen to all signals coming our way and to deal with them in an appropriate manner.
Fantastic. André, we have 10 minutes left. I want to turn the last section here into career and leadership. In your mind, what characterizes a great leader?
Well, within Roche, we've gone for a sort of a revolution around this approach over the last generations. The traditional model of a leader is somebody who knows everything better than you. He's on top of his tree, he's on top of the pyramid, and he continues to take every possible decision in the best interest of the company and the employee. For me, that's a model a little bit of the past. What we want to have today is people who come to work because they want to be part of what we are doing. Not because we employ them, not because we pay them a salary, not because we provide them safety, security, and eventual retirement, but because we want them to bring the live forces to the office. So I see there is a little bit of a schizophrenia into the way we behave normally. We've been told that making money is what is good business. Yeah? If you are successful, if it's when you make the company a lot of money. If you make a lot of money, you get a high salary, a bonus, etc. We want people who work for us to realize that their purpose is to help the patient, doing today what the patient needs tomorrow. We don't want the sort of people who come into the office, close the door of the office, and only look at the margin. We want people who actively take ownership of what they're doing. So that requires a completely different type of leadership. It's more a sort of the manager as an impresario. How can we identify talent, and how can we give every person within the group the opportunity to not only own their job, but also making sure that they use the resources that the company gives to them in the best possible manner. So not only one hierarchical level, but everybody has a file, a document, a job, and goes on and does it. And the real leader is the leader who is able to create the setting in which this is possible.
So when you are recruiting a leader, could be a CEO, department head, people from your board, whatever leaders that, and you've been recruiting a lot of leaders in your lifetime, I know. What are the key traits, just in brief? What are the key traits you're looking for in a leader of tomorrow?
So to start with, for me, the important point is that they should be understanding what the values of our business are. We've defined those, we've set them down. We are looking for courage, we're looking for integrity, we're looking for passion, we're looking for tolerance. And these four values are values which I would try to tease out of a leader when I'm having a conversation with them. I also would like them to understand that social relationship, in particular dealing with minorities, and sadly with minorities I have to add gender issue, because at Roche we are still actively trying to restore the balance, but we are still a male-dominated company. We need to be able to identify people who are able to promote talent rather than trying to be the answer to all the problems. And that's quite a subtle game. It's more a question of instinct and values than it is of achievement, CVs, and things like this. We need a alignment on values. We need, of course, complete integrity. Without this, there is nothing to be done at this stage. And we need an understanding of what the company is about. The company is about doing today what the patient needs tomorrow. And if that means that you will miss your sales target because you have to put more money into research or something like this, then so be it. And so we need this humility I was talking about before.
When you look at your own career journey, André, and you have had a very, very impressive one, we learn from roadblocks and failures. And when you look back, I mean, is there a roadblock they wish you had avoided and that you learned from?
Well, first of all, I don't think my career is so exciting. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and I think that's something we should always accept. I like this notion of what's the word? Being able to seize opportunity, an opportunistic approach. If suddenly a door's open, don't try to shut it. Make the most out of it. I think that's quite important. Is there something that I would do differently? I would perhaps try to be more outspoken quicker. 40 years ago, when I started in business, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was elected to the board of our family company, I often in discussion decided that it's not my place to sort of say something because I was the youngest. Now that I'm one of the oldest, it's easier not to deal with that. But if you ask me, I should have sort of intervened more early. And in particular, I should have spoken much more earlier of the whole nature component. When I arrived on the board of our family company, I was elected to 2 boards at the same time. When I arrived on the board of this company, I said, guys, what are we doing for nature? And what I was told was nature is in Africa, nature is in the reserve, in the nature reserve. It's not here in the boardroom. In the boardroom, we make money. Don't interrupt us. And that has completely changed in the past 30 years. Now people realize that we are, nature is the life support system on Earth. We need to take account of it if you want to continue to be able to flourish as a company. And this is not just because nature is beautiful or because nature looks nice, it smells nice. It's because it is absolutely indispensable to our survival. We will not survive as a species without well-functioning ecosystems. And again, the pandemic is a proof of this. So I should have been more outspoken on those terms earlier.
We have here to conclude it. Last question here. We have more than 2,800 delegates at HPAIR this weekend, and we have some very impressive talents. They are on steep journeys, on their own leadership journeys. What advice would you give all our delegates at HPAIR here as we are closing on when they're building their leadership journeys? What should they do? What should they pursue? Things to avoid? How do you become a leader? What's your advice to them, André?
Well, summing up what we've just discussed, it strikes me that to be a leader today is to be somebody who listens, is to be somebody who brings together, it's to somebody who empowers people, it's to be somebody who really is more a master servant than a master. And that requires, there is a contradiction startup manager who has to go through hell, who has to sort of push everybody out of his way so that he can get somewhere. It has much more to do with collaboration. For me, there's a very, very much a philosophical point here. Domination is something that doesn't work in the long term. The stable systems are based on taking parts of both sides, on collaboration. If I look at the virus, it's exactly the same thing. We will not eradicate this virus. We will have to learn to live with it. Well, when you're at the beginning of a career, you should think that the people you are working with are the people you are going to have to lead. So the idea of pushing them out of the way so that you get to the top is not the right approach these days. And not only these days, in general, it's just not the right approach. You need to be able to federate the energy around you and to bring people together to the next step. Henry IV, Part 2, Shakespeare, once more upon the breach. this constant effort of always bringing the troops together and motivating them to go to that's much more leadership than what we've seen in the past.
André, fantastic. I wish we had more time. We have a fantastic weekend ahead of us. We were so delighted that you could take your time. We're very grateful of your time here on a Friday afternoon in Europe to share with us your learnings about sustainability, business, force for good, and some very good nuggets here on leadership at the end of it. We are very, very thankful. I wish we could have a round of applause. I'm sure you're going to see the emojis running on the right-hand side, and there will be a lot of them coming in from our delegates. Thanks so much, André, for attending the session. It was great to learn from you, and I hope to see you at another session very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Can I just say that if anybody has a question, don't hesitate. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. Please send it on. Thank you very much, everybody.
Fantastic, André. Thanks a lot. And that, I think, was an invitation to a lot of you to look up André Hoffmann on your LinkedIn and other vehicles. We can also help you to be in contact. Thanks so much to Andrew. So this concludes the session. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for attending. We have a fantastic program ahead of us. I hope you will enjoy HPAIR. I hope we have a chance to meet in some of the future sessions in the coming days and over time as well. I wish you all an amazing conference. See you at the other tracks. Have a fantastic time. See you. Thank you.